Hi, everyone. We're just going to give it one more minute for folks to join, and then we'll start. Okay, Erica, you can start.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Law for Black Lives for our Best Practices webinar. We're really excited to be engaging with you and connecting with you around supporting organizers tomorrow. So we appreciate it. Just want to let you know that Law for Black Lives is an organization that organizes attorneys to show up and support base building organizations, and we're grateful for the opportunity and welcome you into the work. Thanks. So I'll pass it on to Christina.
Hi, everyone. So just some quick logistic notes. If you would like to see this, the speakers while they're speaking, you can look at the upper right-hand portion of your screen and click speaker view. If you just want to look at the PowerPoint, then you can leave it on your default view right now. There is a question and answer function and also a chat box. So you can send specific questions to panelists. If you press there you'll see 2 with the colon, and there's a blue highlighted name or list, so you can decide to send a message to a particular speaker or all of the panelists, or everyone. And then lastly, this will be recorded, so we'll be able to post it onto our website after we conclude this session. And there'll be time for a question and answer, and I will kick it to Aman.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Iman Freeman, and I am on the advisory board of Law for Black Lives. I'm glad that you can join us today. I'm just gonna go over a couple of things, and I'm drawing most of, I think, my comments from my experience working in Ferguson, Baltimore, and Baton Rouge, providing rapid response and legal support to the activists there. The activists and organizers in those cities. And just to start, largely of what we at Law for Black Lives believe in, and what we in Baltimore, with the Baltimore Action Legal Team believe in, we apply a movement lawyering or a community lawyering approach to much of this. And what that means is that we take much of our direction we take from the actual organizers on the ground. And so I believe, Christina, we will have an organizer on the webinar. Okay. We'll have an organizer on the webinar, I guess following me or shortly. So I just want to basically uplift that and make sure that whatever you do and however you decide to show up, make sure that you're taking direction from local organizers. And just a couple of pointers. I think, we said this, I think we had a webinar where we focused on a couple of tips as far as movement lawyering in the age of Trump, because we saw a lot of civil disobedience, a lot of protests, a lot of actions right around the time that this current administration started, And so we had a webinar then. So I just want to reiterate some of the things that we said during that webinar. I think the first one is that law will not save us. And as attorneys, as legal workers, we are often, community and organizers often look to us for, that the answer. And I think that as attorneys, we definitely need to approach this as we need to acknowledge the limitations of the law. And I think if we do that and we realize that only collective power will save us in this moment, I think that we'll approach this a little differently. Also, I think that, we know, and we've learned in law school and we learn in our practice, that the law is not neutral, is not objective, and is not fair. And I think as attorneys and legal workers, we need to speak truth to that. Also, I think that we definitely need to know that it's irresponsible to convince our clients that the law will save them, right? And most likely, I think in a lot of what we see, as far as the protests, a lot of what we're reacting to are legal things. And so we definitely need to be honest about our relationship with the law at that time. I think when and if you do decide to help organizers locally, you definitely want to make sure you go without an agenda. You definitely want to make sure you follow the lead of the community and just acknowledge that we may not have all the answers as lawyers. Let's see. I think definitely want to try to find and connect with other lawyers who think similarly as you. I know that we have groups of lawyers in many cities, like DC. We have L4BL DC. We have pockets in Atlanta. We have Song. We have pockets in Miami. But I think in a lot of cities, I think a lot of individual attorneys are still looking for other attorneys that think the same way and are willing to show up and support organizers the way that they're doing in, the more populous cities. I would say if you can find that attorney, definitely stick close. And definitely also reach out to Law for Black Lives. We have a growing list of attorneys in our database, and it's getting longer by the day. And Christina, she's the director of membership, so she can definitely connect you with other attorneys who may be willing to show up and help organizers and support the movement. I think also, and we're going to talk about rapid response work a little shortly, but I definitely want us to hold equally rapid response work and systemic change work. What we saw in Baltimore was there was a need during the uprising, of course, and Ferguson, to have, rapid response. And what I mean by rapid response, and I'll go over those very quickly later, jail support, legal observing, emergency litigation. There's always a need for that. But on the same token, there's also a need to one day or whenever we stop bailing people out to work on the structural issues that got us here in the first place. And depending on the topic, that can be many different things, whether or not, as we're seeing, that can be the community's relationship with the police reform, bail reform. It could be housing reform. It could be many different things. And so I want us to make sure that we hold equally. And I think for attorneys, oftentimes the more sexy work gets the pull, right, and gets the most people. And so when we talk about that systemic work and we talk about that sexy work where we're working to undo systemic and institutional racism, more people may be gravitated towards that as opposed to legal observing and jail support and jail care. And what I want to impress upon all of you is that they're both important, and we need to make sure that we're showing up to do both. And also, I think just basically stay resolved to be a part of this fight. This is going to be a very, very long road. We're going to see a lot of this oppressive systemic issues. They're going to manifest itself in different ways. And I think that we definitely need to make sure that we stay energized, we stay faithful. And this is why Law for Black Lives was built, to connect us. And so I'm glad that we have the representatives from the different associations here. Hopefully this will be the beginning of a very nurturing relationship. So that's all I had on that first piece. As far as what attorneys can do, and we did talk about that, there are many different things. As far as rapid response, attorneys can provide jail support. And what that looks like is for all of the cities that I worked in, Baton Rouge, Ferguson, and Baltimore, there was a hotline or a central line where legal observers would basically have that number. And when someone was arrested, they would call that number. And that's how we kept track of the people that were arrested. Because for many cities, a person wouldn't show up into the system until they were arraigned or until they had their first court appearance. And so the way that we kept track of people was through that jail support hotline. The hotline was just like, we received just about any type of call you can imagine you generally receive on a hotline. And then depending on the jurisdiction, it looks a little different, but that's really what jail support is. The next one. Coordinating criminal defense. So like I said, so in Baltimore, our setup looked a little different because we had a great relationship with the Office of Public Defender. And so that they were able to provide us with a lot of support. Completely different situation in Baton Rouge and Ferguson, where we had to rely on criminal defense attorneys to help us with that. And so I think this is definitely going to look different depending on the jurisdiction in the state that you're in. But that's another thing that lawyers or attorneys can do in the moment. Yeah, so rapid litigation. So we did see this actually a lot in Baton Rouge, where we saw a lot of civil litigation. We saw that a lot in Baton Rouge. So I will say, again, that looks different. And in Ferguson, we did have a lot. We had tear gas litigation. We had adjunctive relief. And if there is a need for that in any of the cities, we can definitely connect you with the folks that did the litigation for Baton Rouge and Ferguson. There are a lot of lessons learned, and I think that there are definitely a lot of pleadings that could possibly be shared, and I think that would definitely help. But that's another thing that attorneys can do in the moment. Anything else? Okay, so yeah, that's it. And I think another thing I just want to leave out is legal observe. You know, you don't have to be an attorney to do it, but that's another thing that attorneys can do. They can actually, NLG has coined the neon green hats, but that's another thing that I think attorneys can definitely do to ensure that people are able to organize and protest, without any issues from the police. And I think I kind of talked about, I kind of talked about how the lawyers show up. And it definitely, again, you want to follow the lead of the organizers. It's not the role of the attorneys to negotiate with the police or other community members. And I think I think at first it will be very different, I think, than how we're normally viewed and how our relationship with the community normally is. I think, normally, people look to attorneys for that expertise. They look to attorneys for direction. They look to attorneys for those things. And I think when we show up sometimes in communities, we expect that. But I just urge everyone to kind of suppress that, turn off that ego, turn off that elitist attitude that we all learned in law school, and just try to, allow yourself to be led by the community.
All right, thank you so much, Iman. And I know that we're going to have some additional comments for you. If anybody has any particular questions for Iman, you can chat it in the chat box or use the Q&A function. And we're going to pass it over to Candace, who is organizer with the BLM network regionally.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet y'all. Thanks for having me on this call. Can I see that? I'm sorry. Cool. All Oh yeah, introduce myself. Thank you. Bouncing between calls here. Everybody's in rapid response mode. Hey everyone, my name's Candace. I'm with the Black Lives Matter Network as an organizer on staff. I'm also with our Minneapolis chapter. Just wanted to talk a little bit about some of my experiences working with legal and how just like some best practices, how folks can coordinate and support organizers on the ground. And is this a question and answer type of situation? Just a thing. Okay, cool. So I think the first point is it's really crucial for legal to support and follow the leadership of organizers. That is primarily because, like, generally when we're doing direct actions or we're doing rapid response, we ourselves have a chain of communication and ways of making decisions that both are like meant to keep ourselves safe and keep folks who are coming to our actions safe. And so like following the folks who are leading stuff and not just some random person who might be on the street, or even like inserting your own opinion or like whatever you think is necessary may not actually go with the plan that's being created. So just really putting that out there, like we have had a lot of good and bad experiences in Minneapolis working with legal. So that's one thing. Sorry, my bad. The other thing is, it's actually, we generally don't negotiate with the police. A lot of Black organizers have taken on this politic as a real practice to stay committed to. And so like, again, following the lead of the organizer, not putting yourself in a position to negotiate with the police is really critical. A couple other things. Uh-huh.
You might decide to do an action like we can on this notice.
Yeah, okay, cool. Thank you, love. Yeah, and then I think the other thing is to keep in mind is that like we are oftentimes making rapid response decisions. We might say like at 9 a.m. that we're gonna do an action at 6 p.m. And so like it's also really legit and real that like not every single thing has been thought through. And I think especially for lawyers, it's really helpful for y'all to think through the legal things for us, because it's not always the thing that's on the top of our brains. And like in the moment, like we might just decide like we need to take over this highway. And if you're there observing, like just like staying on top of that, doing like legal observing and supporting folks and making sure folks know their rights in real time, and trying to coordinate with the person who oftentimes will have someone who's point on legal or the action lead or whatever, trying to coordinate with that person to make sure that they know what kind of decision that they're making, but again, not tell them the decision that they need to be making, just giving them advice on that stuff. The other thing is in those rapid response moments, especially understanding that like our brains can be a little fuzzy, you know? And so I've had experience with lawyers who they think I'm mad at them or whatever, because I'm just like, I have to be really direct, and that might seem confrontational, but it's oftentimes not about you, it's about the entire situation. And so I think that's something that oftentimes doesn't get talked about is like, what is the emotional support for organizers who are doing that work and really like oftentimes are taking in their hands the responsibility of the lives of like thousands of people at a time. So just being really aware of that component. And then I think when it comes to like going to court and trial and stuff like that, fighting back cases, I think that like what I've experienced is most helpful is legal who's really able to walk through the whole process with me in ways that are not lawyer terms. I'm a super smart person. I'm a well-educated young Black woman, but I do not know anything about legal stuff. So really trying to break that down in a way that doesn't feel condescending, but feels accessible. And as well, like all of y'all are obviously on this call, you probably have a certain politic, like keeping in mind that like part of the legal strategy is also like, what is the political strategy? And so like the best lawyers that we work with out of Minneapolis, they understand like okay, we think that like this court moment is actually a really good moment to do like court support and mobilization, and here's why. And really talking with organizers through like the political strategy as well, and how like legal stuff, litigation, is that what it is, right? That's the official term, see? Like, what is the process of litigation, the litigation strategy connected to the political strategy, and how can organizers be on top of that? So like when I was a defendee for the Mall of America case, we actually talked like a whole year's worth of planning, and they were like, okay, for this court thing, it actually doesn't matter. You don't need to mobilize people, but like this one is actually really important for you to mobilize, so that we can really think about our capacity and our strategies in that way. And then, yeah, like the emotional support piece as well, like especially for young Black people, which is oftentimes the folks who are going to court, like that can be a really terrifying experience. So just trying to hold a lot of compassion for folks through that process. Did I answer these questions?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think maybe just one more question I would have is like, what can they do if they're right after bed, and they're showing up to an action?
Lawyers?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So Erica asked a question like, what happens if you wake up, you see the thing on your phone and you decide to go to the action? Obviously the first thing you can do when you show up is be a legal observer. So taking notes, and really watching the process. Oftentimes, like we try not to be super recognizable when we're leading actions, but you can usually find the person at the front of the march or the front of the action. And just introducing yourself, I think, is really important to show your actual credentials. So if you have a business card, if you have something like that, make sure you bring that with you, because some Joe Schmo comes in and says they want to support you legally, like I'm going to be like, who are you? Are you the feds? So making sure that you're able to show your credentials and introduce yourself to folks, and just ask, like, if you go up to someone and you're like, hey, are you leading this action? And they're like, no, just ask them to point you to the person, offer your credentials, and just work until you find that person, and just let that person know that you're here for support, and make sure you take down their contact information, if they let you, and then you share your contact information. And I think that's also a point, like, try to follow up as well, if you have capacity, because like usually after an action, if arrests don't happen, but there's other stuff that might happen, or the lead organizers don't get arrested, they're thinking about how do we get folks out, how do we do all these other things, and aren't thinking about like, oh yeah, that random lawyer I met at the middle of the action. So just trying to follow up with folks. Yeah, and then just be on the watch, and like as you can, advise people on some of the decisions that they're making in real time, and breathe. Please breathe. Like, I know it feels stressful. I know you're like, oh my God, this is super illegal, or this is super risky. But oftentimes we're doing that on purpose. So yeah, just remember to breathe when you're supporting us. Another question came in: is there a designated meeting location for all volunteers to touch base before the protest? Are we supposed to wear suits? From Tiffany. Sometimes there's a designated meeting location, and I know a lot of the work that Law for Black Lives is doing is actually trying to like build a base of lawyers and like make sure they're connected to folks locally in the community. Oftentimes, if there's like a meeting location for folks who are going to actually be part of the support team for an action, that's not public information. And so like that's really about you integrating yourself in the process and building relationships, especially if you want to be deep in that. And like I usually don't let lawyers come to that unless they've been doing stuff with us. But like coming to the top of the, coming actually on time to the protest is a good way also to know who's there, because those usually the people who are leading it are the people who are there on time. So touching base there, and if not, you just have to kind of show up and figure it out. But it really depends action to action. And then, are we supposed to wear suits? I don't think you need to wear suits. No, not at all. I don't think that actually is necessarily the best way to build trust if you're building new relationships. And I think just to like point out the like trust piece, it's not about like that we don't think you're in it for the right reasons. But oftentimes organizers have so many enemies coming from them in so many ways. We have to have a level of security and a level of hyper awareness around who's approaching us and who's trying to help. Like some of y'all might know, like the Mall of America, the reason that a lot of the evidence that they had against us is they actually infiltrated our meetings leading up to the Mall of America protests back in 2015. So that's why maybe someone might be like, who is this person? Just try and push through that and really just show like you're about this work, you're in it for the long term, and you actually really want to support. Anything else I should hit on? Christina, Iman, anything else? Good? All right, cool. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks, y'all. Thanks for the work you do. Here you go.
All right. So I don't know, Iman or Erica, if you all could speak to the good protester, bad protester narrative and how it actually applies on the ground, because I think that there are a lot of assumptions around who folks should be representing. So either of you can speak to that.
Erica, you want to start and then I can finish?
Sure. I just have a couple of things on that. I think the first thing to understand is that direct action is usually in direct conflict with the law. And as Candace said, it many times it's on purpose. And then I think also one other thing I would mention is anti-Blackness and how that shows up. So like in the eyes of the state, many times Black people are always looked at as criminals. So I think that's good to understand. And then also when we think about the media and how the state sometimes paints us as organizers, is that we already look like criminals and bad people. So I think it's important to push through that discomfort, right? Because it's okay, I think, initially be like, oh gosh, this feels wrong, right? Many of us are going through that, but I think pushing through and acknowledging our humanity and our dignity, and in doing that, deciding that if I believe in freedom, then I must represent these people in a way that honors that. And so I'll pass it to Iman.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, so definitely, I just want to build on what Erica said. I think this definitely stems from, lawyers were very risk averse, right? And we have a tendency to not want to touch something that necessarily. And first of all, let's be all the way real. One, we're doing this in our volunteer time, right? And so I'm doing this in my volunteer time. I already got a job. I got kids. I got marriage. I got everything else. And the last thing I want to do is to try to bail someone out who looks as if they're doing way too much, or, they're not worthy of being bailed out. And I think let's also, another thing to be real about is that none of what we're doing or talking about is new. None of this, right? This kind of goes back to the Martin and Malcolm debate, right? As far as, who was a good protester and a bad protester. And I think as attorneys and just as people who legal workers who support the movement for Black lives or any other social justice movement, we need to be careful and not. We need to uplift the fact that a person's freedom shouldn't be tied to their ability to pay. And, that goes into the whole bail reform issue. But I think that, by doing this work, we definitely don't want to place judgment on a person before it really needs to happen. And just because a person is bailed out, that doesn't mean that they're not going to face charges or face trial or conviction. It just means that they're going to spend less days in jail. And so I think we want to be, and I think, and what I tell people, and what I tell people all the time, and what I tell activists, because a lot of activists deal with this as well, is that what works for your city or your state or your town or your county. What works for that. And so one of the things that, we definitely like to uplift local autonomy. We respect local authority of the people on the ground. But we're just not into trying to figure out who's a good protester and the bad protester. In Baltimore, you probably heard, the people that we bailed out, they were called everything but children of God. But it wasn't our place to judge them before a judge judged them, basically. And we just didn't want to get involved in that. And so I definitely want to just state that. And I think you don't have to condone a person's behavior to believe that they should be free until they're convicted. I think sometimes it's just as simple as that. And, we definitely, we have L4BL, and I think between the three of us on this webinar, we have enough narrative and messaging and framing that can help kind of combat a lot of what you'll probably hear if you do decide to bail out a bad protester. We can definitely help you with that, because I think what we've learned, definitely what I've learned working in Baltimore and DC, is sometimes just messaging is half the battle. And sometimes it's not what you do, but it's how you communicate what's been done. And I think as long as your actions are rooted in your values, whatever they may be, and like Erica talked about, we definitely reject anti-Blackness, as long as it's rooted in the values and what you're working towards and your ultimate end goal, I think that you'll be okay, regardless or irrespective of whoever you decide to bail out.
All right, so I'm gonna open it up for questions. Are there any questions that folks have? You can chat in the chat box. So I know that there is one question that we addressed privately, but I mean, I think that folks generally have a question about is, if you're barred in another state than where you live and you're trying to figure out a role, the role that you can play in assisting protesters in a particular, where you currently are, what is it that you can do? And so one thing that we said, one thing that we said was that you can help facilitate. So you can help facilitate the legal, coordinate the legal team. You can help with the hotline or jail support. You can do everything basically except to litigate. And I don't know if anybody has any comments for that. Sorry, I'm reading the chat box. Okay, so actually this question is for Candace. I don't know if Candace is still there, but so Candace, you referred to the best lawyers in Minneapolis. What did they do that you'd want us to do? So what are some best practices, or what made them so great?
I can try to answer that. I think the major thing that she spoke about was that it seemed like when they were going through their cases, their court proceedings, that there was some collaboration, right? So the attorneys wasn't just telling them, this is what we're going to do, this is what it should be. There was actually collaboration. And I think they walked them through the process. They broke the law down in a way that was accessible to lay people. And so I think those two things are one. It's important I think the two takeaways are one, collaboration, and then making the language accessible. I think one of the more important things is that when organizers decide to take an action, I think even right now, organizers have been calling us about, well, what is the risk, right? We want to understand the risk and what we're getting ourselves into. So how do you convey that to them in a way that they understand what's going on and what they are exposing themselves to? And so I think those were some of the takeaways from what Candice said and from my conversations with her about the work she's been doing in Minnesota.
Okay. Hold on, sorry. There is another question in the community box. Okay, so somebody actually was able to respond to the hotline thing. So I will in a few minutes go through what is actually happening tomorrow. So I see your question and I will answer it. Okay, so I don't know if anybody can talk to this piece about who to go for help if you're on the ground and let's say there are mass arrests, or you want to participate and you don't know who to reach out to, like for example, the hotline question. So normally the National Lawyers Guild, one of their strengths is that they put together hotlines for bail support and jail support, I believe. And then I don't know if Aman or Erica, you can talk about any other resources.
No, I think it just depends on the city. So I'm not sure. I know in the questions I know Tiffany's asking as far as I don't know what city she's referring to. I know we have a couple of different cities. So I think it really depends on the city. Okay, so she's referring to New York.
Okay,
I don't know.
so
Do you know? I think Christina, you were reaching out to the local New York folk, right?
yeah, so I'm reaching out to I had reached out to the organizers in New York. So there is a protest happening in New York tomorrow that's being led by BYP 100, one of our partners. And I can follow up with you offline, Tiffany, about ways that they can support, because they did reach out to us about some particular legal needs. I know that they need legal observers for sure, but they may need some other things. So I can definitely, if you chat me your email, I can follow up with you offline. And then one of our partners, the Black Movement Law Project, is really good at helping do trainings on the different roles that lawyers can play, and also experience with when they're like prepping folks for mass arrests. Let's see, there's another question. Okay. And then, okay. And actually, somebody had posted the hotline, the Lawyers Guild hotline for New York for tomorrow. So I'll chat that to you. All right. So what exactly is happening tomorrow? And what are the legal needs right now? So as many of you know, there were some violent white supremacist protests in Charlottesville last weekend. So what was going on in Charlottesville is not a new occurrence. So for months, folks on the ground in terms of like residents of Charlottesville had been working with the city council to get the Robert E. Lee statue removed and have the park renamed. And they were successful. So the day of the council meeting of the last council vote in July, on July 7th, white supremacists, particularly specifically the KKK, came out and were the aggressor and kind of terrorized the local residents who were attending the meeting, and had made it known that they were calling folks from all over the country to descend upon Charlottesville on August 12th to prevent the removal of the statue. So we had coordinated with the local Black Lives Matter chapter, the Southerners, Surge and a couple of other groups to help them prepare for mass arrests and things like that, because the relationship with the local police department was not particularly friendly back in July, and they were not particularly helpful in protecting residents against the KKK, and so one of the things that had come to light after this Unite the Right rally was that there are white supremacist rallies happening all over the country. So there was first the protest against Google, which was publicized in 9 different cities by the same organizers of the Unite the Right rally. And there are also like a concerted effort by David Duke and Richard Spencer and other white supremacists to have gatherings at public universities that are beacons of liberalism, as their words, not mine. And so there has been a lot of concern by like local organizers who are working around racial justice, student groups, and a whole bunch of other folks that really want to show that, they're speaking out against hate and they don't support what's happening. And so the root of this webinar was that the National Bar had reached out to us to help connect them with folks on the ground who are doing actions on Saturday, tomorrow. So right now we know that there is an action in Boston Commons tomorrow at noon. And then there is a solidarity march in New York, who like clearly expressed that they need legal support. And then there are actually other groups in about, the last time I checked, 10 different locations who are doing different solidarity events to stand up against hate. So I had sent the link to that information to the vice president of the National Bar the National Bar Association, so you can follow up with her about that. But you can also email me offline to get more information on who you could reach out to. But really, this webinar was a starting point to kind of give folks the fundamentals of how they can help in times of crisis like these, and know that it is a process, and the key thing to do is to actually build relationship with your local communities and local organizers who are thinking out who are actually spending the time thinking out these responses, whether they're spontaneous reactions or planned protests, and introduce yourselves to them and start building relationships with them so that when the time comes, you're able to support them in a meaningful way, which I think is one of the things that's been reiterated throughout the webinar. We are sorry, I'm trying to read questions in the chat box. Let's see. And I don't know if anybody else has anything to add while I look at these. Lisa, I can tell you the specifics about where legal observers are needed in New York tomorrow offline, but I see your question. Okay. Are there any other questions that folks have that are not logistical things for tomorrow? Is there anything that anybody else wants to add?
No, just definitely, don't forget to, if you have any other questions, reach out to L4BL. It's info@law4blacklives.org. That's really it.
Just thank you for hopping
We're here
on.
to support you. Definitely. Yeah, we're definitely here. Christine, I think you sent it to all panelists.
Oh, sorry.
I think we're definitely here to support you. And please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And so this will be posted on our website. I'm going to try it in the checkbox right now.
I think we just got a question.
Oh, okay. Can you read it? Sorry, I can't see it.
Sure. Can you describe in more detail what you mean by not negotiating with police? I think this could mean many different things. So if you're a legal observer, I think it's very important that you try to remain neutral. And you try to allow the organizers are there to, they generally have goals, they generally have demands, they generally have a direction that they would like, for the action to proceed in. And so as a legal observer, you definitely want to make sure that you don't insert yourself into that. So that is definitely one way in which you don't want to negotiate with police. I think another way, as far as just on the long haul, I think that's part of taking the lead from organizers. We are not there. The organizers will let us know when they would like for us to step up. And they'll let us know, what they need from us at any point in time. And, we want to make sure that we don't, as attorneys, we aren't, a lot of people, especially police officers, will look to us, we'll look to the attorney and we'll try to circumvent the organizers, but we just want to make sure that we don't interject ourselves when we're not needed. Did that answer your question? I don't know. Oh, it disappeared. Steve.
Okay, so there is a question on the street. Do we have a client? And if so, who is our client?
Well, if your role is a legal observer, then I think to have a client, you want to represent someone. And I think that if you're not necessarily representing someone, if you're serving as a legal observer at the time. So I would say that you don't have a client per se, if you're on the street. Because as a legal observer, the goal is to remain, I say, was really not neutral. NLG, they speak the neutral as far as you're there to observe. And there are many different things that you observe based on the jurisdiction. You can just observe whether or not the police gave orders of dispersal like they're supposed to. You can observe how many police officers do you think is on a particular corner. You can observe how many tanks, because we do see tanks now. And so there are many different things as a legal observer that may be important down the road. And so you don't necessarily have a client per se.
Okay.
Also, and I'm sorry, also notate if there are any chemical weapons being used as well.
Right. Okay. And then, so unfortunately, our person from the legal coordinator for Boston tomorrow is not able to get on right now. So I think we will leave it there if there are no other questions. All right. Thank you so much, everyone.
All right. Have a good evening.
Good night.